and welcome to Hopes and Visions by Capital Collaborative. I'm Hannah Whistler, the senior lead on the Capital Collaborative team at Camelback Ventures. Capital Collaborative is a community of white identifying funders committed to increasing racial equity in their work, moving money to BIPOC-led organizations, and diversifying power in the funding landscape. The Capital Collaborative was created because the Camelback Ventures team saw a clear need based on their work with our fellows, who are BIPOC identifying entrepreneurs who still receive about 1/3 of the funding compared to their white counterparts. Today, you'll be hearing from members of our third Capital Collaborative cohort, who have spent the past 6 months collaboratively engaged in collective learning, community building, and action planning. This work has not been done in a silo, but in partnership with grantees, community stakeholders, coworkers, and organizations like DEI Works Collective and Actualize Impact. While we've done much of this work together virtually, we're actually coming to you live today from New Orleans, the birthplace of Camelback Ventures almost 10 years ago. We are also on unceded Choctaw, Chitimacha, and Homa land, and I invite you to make a donation to their tribal council at unitedhomanation.org. The goal of this Hopes and Visions event is for our collaborators to share their reflections on their learnings and work together so far and discuss how white funders can purposefully and appropriately disrupt the white held spaces and power in philanthropy. If you're interested in learning more, please visit our website, camelbackventures.org/Capital Collaborative.
Hello, everybody. I am Jasmine Shams-Lau, Senior Advisor to the Capital Collaborative, and I will be hosting our conversations with our Capital Collaborators today. Let me introduce you to our first group. We have Brian Pick, Director of Education Grantmaking at the Schusterman Foundation. We have Katie Cutler, Executive Director at the McCants Foundation, and Brian Doran, CFO at the Lemelson Foundation. Thank you so much for joining me all today.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Okay, so over the past 6 months, you have been involved in quite an intensive and structured process of learning, to say the least. My first question for you is, how did you know that you wanted to participate in a structured learning engagement regarding racial equity?
I think for me, at least, it's a function of the journey that I've been on for the last 10 years or so. And I think part of that journey is talking with people, reading books and podcasts and webinars and things of that nature, but it's not very structured. And I think what appealed to me and to my colleagues was the structured nature of this program over the last 6 months.
Brilliant. Well, you've signed up for the right place, given all the time that we have spent on Zoom together.
For me, it's similar. It was convergence of, I was ready for some personal exploration, and also at our foundation, we were at a time where it really made sense. I also was fortunate to meet Aaron Walker and was just really excited at the idea of carving out space to do this, and also super appreciative of the fact that this is sort of supply side driven, where we're the funders thinking about how we can move more money.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie.
Similarly, I'm on a lifelong journey to try to improve my knowledge of racial equity and the actions that I can take as a white man. So there's a personal goal, but also I'm new to the philanthropic world. I was in philanthropy for about a year prior to joining the fellowship, and I felt like I knew just enough to be dangerous. And this was a way to do some real structured work around the intersection of racial justice and the world of philanthropy.
Brilliant. You kind of mentioned in there that, there was the career transition. was an indicator that maybe this is the time to engage in this work. For all of you, and if you have more to add as well, Brian, was there anything specific that told you that you might be ready for this kind of intensive learning experience?
I feel like coming out of COVID, I was really ready to be around other human beings. And this was such a good opportunity to meet and work with other people. That was just a really great timing component. It's been really wonderful to be with other people.
That was great. When we got together 6 months ago, it was the first time I had traveled for work since the pandemic began, so that was exciting. But then also in our organization, the timing was perfect because we were concluding one part of our own internal DEI work. We were about to embark on the next phase, but there was a bit of a gap of work, and being able to kick off the 6 months here was perfect for us.
Brilliant.
Likewise, I'm fortunate to work at a foundation that's deeply committed to racial equity. So this seemed like a way to think about kind of both theoretical and practical ways of using power in ways that advance racial equity.
Amazing, brilliant. I think some people who have tuned in today might be, interested in what do you get from doing work that is in a group and that is structured versus, continuing to do your own work of reading, educating yourself. Maybe you're listening to podcasts or, whatever that might be. There's plenty of opportunities to learn and continue learning a deepening your racial equity journey on your own. So what is it about a group component that spoke to you?
Well, I do think both the individual work and the group work are important. But for me, I'm a cohort junkie. I've done a lot of cohort programs. I really value that learning experience. For me, learning is as kind of individual as it is social. In other words, it's kind of a social endeavor to learn together. And I've learned a tremendous amount of from folks, particularly those who have been in the philanthropic world longer.
A huge bonus too, to meet other people who have similar roles, share best practices. I mean, we are now basically colleagues, friends, practically family, because of some of the conversations we've had. I don't think you can beat it. And accountability, right? If you are left to do all of your learning by yourself, it gets more difficult. It's really helpful to have other people holding your nose to the grindstone too.
Katie said similar roles, but I think also similar challenges and questions.
Yeah.
And on your own, you may not come up with the answers that work best, but collectively you can bounce ideas off of each other and get to a better solution.
Fantastic. Are there any particular moments in the cohort that you want to share with our audience that stand out as memorable?
I would say two things. One, while I've very much valued working with my white colleagues, I have appreciated connecting with the Camelback fellows who are on the grantee side and having very candid conversations of what that experience is like. And then it was wonderful to be deeply rooted in the communities of East Durham and here in New Orleans. I feel like I'm very connected to those places in a way that I wasn't before.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Katie.
No. Good.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience. We are going to talk to a few other collaborators in just a few moments. Welcome back. I have three other collaborators with me right now. We have Meg Evans, Director of Strategic Portfolio Initiatives at Blue Meridian Partners. Did I get that right?
It's a mouthful.
Thank you. Liz Kane, the Managing Director of Core Services at MacArthur Foundation. And Stephen Kopik, Director of Portfolio Strategy and Management, also at Blue Meridian Partners. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
So we are going to talk about an aspect of the Capital Collaborative that might seem strange to some people, and that is that it is a white affinity group. So when you were looking for an opportunity to engage in racial equity work, was that aspect that this is a white affinity group, was that important in deciding to engage in this this opportunity for learning?
It's an interesting question because for me, at least, it's hard to put yourself back too far, but I actually don't think it was. I don't think it's what really drove me to join the collaborative. In hindsight, I now truly hold that as one of the most important design choices of the fellowship or the Camelback Collaborative itself. I think that being in a cross-organizational cohort with other white philanthropic professionals that, came here with at least a fundamental baseline commitment to the same commitments and commitment to racial equity and justice. It's just been unlike a space. It's been a very unique space that is unlike any that I have ever been a part of inside of my organization, in other organizations.
And I would say that it was a really big driver for me in choosing the Capital Collaborative. I had been working within the foundation that I'm a part of, and where we've been really wrestling with racial justice and been on a racial justice journey, but it was in mixed race spaces. And I felt unmoored by that, self-conscious, doubting, should I talk? Should I ask questions? Should I hold back? What will people think? And I couldn't, I felt like I couldn't participate. Like that was all, the mental tapes were really ruining my ability to participate. And so that was one of the big drivers in choosing Capital Collaborative, where I felt like this was a safe space to really wrestle with my racialized white identity, and if for good and bad, good and bad, and there's a lot of bad, and work through that in a safe space.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and I think for me, I was particularly drawn to this intersection point that's unique about Capital Collaborative of white folks in mid to senior level roles in philanthropy, and really understanding their particular set of challenges and ways in which we have to wrestle with our own whiteness, the ways in which we are perpetuating the racist systems that require us to be a deep dialogue with each other in a way that felt really unique about this opportunity, was both holding our whiteness and holding the privilege and power of our positions.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but I would love to dig a little bit deeper into how you experienced that dynamic of this being a white affinity space. Like, for instance, you mentioned that it was not part of your decision-making process, but turned into something important for you. So to tell us more about that aspect, how it felt.
I mean, I think we all started to talk about this, but it really allowed me to confront my white racial identity, but also opened me up to, and I think this is what Capital Collaborative does really well, is it didn't stop there. It wasn't, we didn't stay with the white affinity group, but that was sort of the ground that we fertilized in order to then enter into mixed race conversations and dialogues, and invite BIPOC leaders in to challenge us, to share their wisdom, share their experiences. And if I hadn't had that fertile ground, I wouldn't have been able to hear that in the same way. So I think it's the combination that is really has been really resonant and important to me.
And I would say, building on that, I don't know, is accountability a dynamic? I heard one of my fellow collaborators talking about that before, but I just think it's hard to overemphasize how much that's a part of this process. And I would say in a couple different ways. One, just the group that we have has, I think, bonded in a way that we have a lot of accountability to each other. And throughout this process, we have, and I just can't imagine we will stop checking in on each other outside of the experiences that we have here with y'all in Durham and in North Carolina or in New Orleans. I also think I had the opportunity to do this with two of my colleagues, which I think brings another layer of accountability as we go back to our spaces and our organization. And then just what you said, the fellows themselves. I mean, I have never had quite so honest conversations with leaders about how they navigate philanthropy and just the toll that it takes on them, both personally, emotionally, even beyond just the work that they do.
And I'll just build on that honesty piece, because I think one of the dynamics that I've really appreciated about our group is that it's an incredibly honest, vulnerable space. Folks didn't show up in a sort of performative mindset of, hey, we're going to try to look good. It was really from the start, let's be really real about the challenges that we're facing, that we are responsible for, and that created a beautiful space for the work to happen and the action to happen coming out of it.
And again, you've started to allude to this, but I want to get a little bit clearer on it as well. Many people are familiar with the principle, nothing about us without us. And given this experience or just the takeaways that you have developed during this experience, how have you seen, or how do you think that white affinity groups can really demonstrate that principle while still providing that safe space for you to go through that learning journey of vulnerability?
And I think Capital Collaborative has done this so well because the emphasis from the start has been very clear of like, well, white folks, you aren't going in a room and designing something by yourself.
Right.
No, thank you, right? The white affinity space, when we've had that, has really been to process so that when we show up in mixed race spaces, we're not centering whiteness, right? We are really in an ability to co-construct in meaningful ways. And I think Camelback has provided that too, right? Of the opportunity that folks have talked about to connect with fellows and to have real honest conversation across racial lines has been really powerful. So kudos to you all.
Well, to that.
Yeah. No sense in adding to that. I just say, like, this is part of the work. This is part of the work for white philanthropic professionals. Like, we have to be in this space. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to show up for our Black and brown colleagues, our Black and brown people working in the field.
And I think understanding that our humanity, our liberation is tied to our Black and brown colleagues, and their liberation is tied to our liberation, that we're connected, and that I think I experienced in a manifest way through the Capital Collaborative, right? That we can't solve the problems, our Black colleagues can't solve the problems, but together, like it becomes a supercharged, environment that allows us to solve the problems.
Yeah, and something just worth mentioning, I don't know if we've actually shared this directly with you, but all of the programming that you have gone through has been designed by the people of color facilitators that have been delivering it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of layers there. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And we will be back in just a few moments. Well, welcome back. Let me introduce you to our next two collaborators. We have Jeremy Grunin, President of the Grunin Foundation, and Heather Barberi, Executive Director of the Grunin Foundation. And these two are quite an interesting duo. We often, for many reasons, but the one I'm going to talk about specifically is because we often encourage people to do this work with a colleague. And we have a few pairs in the cohort. We even have a trio. But you both are our first board staff duo, which is quite special. And I think some people listening might think doing equity and justice work with a colleague or with a board member might feel awkward, right? Or might not seem like such a good idea. So I would love for you to just tell us a bit about your experience in that dynamic.
Yeah, I think I'm going to leave that one to Heather to start off with. So,
yeah, it's interesting. You think colleague, but also my boss, right? Also a board member, also a family member of the foundation that employs me. So I think it could seem awkward. I think, we have an organization that really tries to operate with just really open, honest conversation and transparency. And so we came into this with that. But honestly, I can't imagine having gone through this experience without Jeremy being here. I think it was so powerful because we could dialogue and have conversation, and we kind of had divergent thoughts at some points, right? But it gave us the opportunity to really come together, think about things, and go back and take things and move them to action really quickly. We're a nimble organization and have the ability to make change. But even though there are nimble organizations with that ability, sometimes folks don't move. And I think being in this cohort together, having this dialogue, it's made it a lot easier for us to go back and talk to our full team, our full board, and move to action more quickly.
yeah, and I would just add, I think, two things. Number one, I think it's one of the biggest obstacles to change within organizations, I think, is board versus professional staff, right? And I think we kind of felt like this was a great opportunity for us to make sure that we were simpatico, that we were kind of on the same journey together. And I think to Heather's point, I think she minimizes a little bit, because I certainly at the beginning of the journey, there were moments when Heather would be like, oh my God, we are terrible as an organization. And I would be, oh no, we're doing actually really great. And then 2 hours later, Heather would be like, okay, we're actually okay. And I would be like, no, we're terrible. And
It was balanced.
we would kind of landed somewhere in the middle. So I think it's been a good offset for us.
That is fascinating to hear about. And I think one of the things that you mentioned in your answers is that you have been able to act on the opportunity to be nimble. And so I would love for you to share a little bit more about that. How has the cohort experience mobilized you to any immediate action within your own organization?
Right. So I think in that moment when we were, wrestling between where we were kind of in the continuum, I think we also realized that in going back through some of our website, some of our own kind of our tenets of how we do the work, we realized that we had a lot of work to do. And so we had the ability to say, this is a great moment for us to launch into strategic planning, to center the equity work that's become so important to what we do. And this gave us, I think, the Capital Collaborative gave us such a great grounding for the ability to do that work and to at least have some idea of where we wanted to head as an organization.
Yeah, and I think it really caused us to go back and say, kind of interrogate practices, who we were funding, what we were funding, even questioning pillars and why we had them, and were we missing intersectionality. It caused us to look at, just so many of the pieces that, we thought we were, doing trust-based philanthropy. We don't have a grant process. We speak to everyone, and we had a lot of blind spots. And I think this really opened our eyes to, those blind spots, and, pushed us to say, we were, interviewing and sitting with consultants for the last 2 weeks to say, we need to move on this journey, not just as board and staff, but with community as well. And we need to make some radical changes in the way that we do things. And so I think this was really the impetus and the push we needed for that.
And you started to allude there to the work, how this might have affected your relationships external to the Grunin Foundation as well. So tell me a bit about the responsibility that you feel to work with others beyond the foundation.
Yeah, I think we definitely have that responsibility. And, we've been thinking about how can we take these conversations back to funders in New Jersey. And so getting ready to start a peer funding roundtable to have some of these conversations. I was looking forward to starting next month and going on that journey. But also, how do we show up in boards that we sit on? How do we show up when we're in spaces with other funders? How do we have those conversations, these courageous conversations to really kind of open up that dialogue that oftentimes funders might not be having within their own organizations. And so how can we use what we've learned to kind of help move that conversation along and really make change in the space that's needed?
Yeah, it's been incredibly, for me personally, it's been incredibly impactful, the work that we've been able to do with the professional coaches, and the amount of kind of, I don't want to say hand-holding, but hand-holding for me, to show up differently in our board work that we do outside. As I'm a board member. Heather gives me the opportunity to not really have a job because she runs the foundation day to day. So not having a job gives me the opportunity to serve on a number of boards and to do other things within the state. And as a co-conspirator, in the kind of the racial equity battle, as it were, it's given me a lot more tools and a lot more ability to have courageous conversations and to effectuate change in organizations well beyond the work that we are just doing from a foundation standpoint.
Incredible. Well, that's super, super exciting to hear about, and we wish you all the best with the Funder Roundtable that you'll be launching and all of the work that you're doing with the other boards that you're on, Jeremy. Thank you so much for sharing. We are going to take a step back just to put the Capital Collaboratives work into the context of Camelback Ventures as a whole, the wider work that Camelback Ventures does. And we have this fabulous video to do that for us. It's been produced by Fire on the Bayou and the Camelback Ventures team. And then you'll be hearing from the Camelback Ventures fellows themselves with their thoughts on this work.
Camelback Ventures is an organization that supports people who are entrepreneurs of color and women who are trying to create companies to create positive social impact. Our core job at Camelback is to support folks who are creating companies that are providing direct services to communities and to people who need them. And so if these are the entrepreneurs that we're focused on and they're the ones that are building the future, well, then they need the resources to do that.
The fellowship is an early stage, rigorous accelerator for entrepreneurs of color, women, and non-binary founders. The most important part of the fellowship is the community that it offers the fellows, both with one another, as well as the Camelback team and our extended alumni network.
I think what excites me the most being a part of the Camelback team is just being able to work with the fellows. They all just have such innovative ideas and they bring so much to the table that every time I get to meet with them, I feel like I'm learning so much from them.
They're amazing. They actually give us energy. It's just really cool to work with a group of people who are all passionate about the same thing. And when we get that together, that really is where genius is born, and that's the way we can solve some of these problems together.
It's a place where I feel most like working with a team. It's super collaborative, and I feel really supported in the work we do. Everyone is super focused on the mission while also supporting each other.
This is part of our vision for Capital Collaborative, which is a cohort program for white funders and social impact investors in order to do the kind of deep unpacking of our racialized superiority and then convert that into more equitable grant-making practices in our institutions.
We are looking for mission-aligned people to convene around being a guardian for the next generation. Camelback is creating a better space, a better ecosystem as a whole that entrepreneurs of color can seek refuge in, even beyond Camelback. I think what we do best is we give them a chance. Generational wealth has really been an output based on unequal wealth distribution historically and contemporarily. Whereas we see generational inheritance as the inputs needed to not only create wealth, but also equitable systems to uphold wealth creation. So it's all about what are you leaving behind for the next in line.
Every fellow that we support at Camelback is creating the future that I want my children to live in. And so I think the reason that people should get involved is because we all have something to give. And Camelback is a type of organization where what you have to give is valuable.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about some other things that Camelback does. My name is Riaz Ghiasadine. I am the Vice President of Program and Talent here at Camelback. And I have the lucky privilege of being here with three of our amazing fellows who have gone through our programming and are part of the Capital Collaborative experience. I'm going to give them a second to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask a few questions. So, Tina, I'll start with you.
Thank you. My name is Tina Neville, and I'm the CEO of Lana Learn. We do education programs domestically and globally.
And I'm Jonathan Santos Silva. I'm the founder of the Liber Institute, and we work to embolden and equip Indigenous young people, families, and educators to transform schools and the communities they serve.
And my name is Antoinette Corl. I am the founder, president, and CEO of Creative Reaction Lab. We help people address systemic oppression, and we particularly work with Black and Latinx youth to redesign their community through a healthy and racially equitable lens.
Well, first of all, thank you all for the work that you do. We know how impactful it is to the communities each of you serve. We also know that you have a lot going on. You have a lot of commitments, right? A lot of things you're doing, but you chose to be here. You chose to be part of the Capital Collaborative experience. Jonathan, I want to kick it off to you and hear from all of you. Why? Why did you choose to be part of this experience?
Yeah, sure. I think there are two reasons. First, working with Indigenous communities, I learned a lot about being a good relative. And I feel like Camelback invested in me at a time, a pivotal time, where others chose not to. They believed in me, and it wasn't just the money, but the time, the connections, the content, developing me as an entrepreneur. And so when the request was made, I felt like I had to do it. Like, that's paying it forward, and it's being a good relative. Second part of it is that so much of this work happens in silos, whether you're in education or in another nonprofit or philanthropy. And we're all trying to do good work, but we do it in our own spaces. And so I feel like the Capital Collaborative is an opportunity to bring that together. And if we're going to reimagine, if we're going to redesign, we ought to be doing it together, right? Because we each have a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I think it's a unique opportunity when you have folks that understand that they are in a racialized majority, they have positional power, they have economic power, they have financial and distribution power, and they're really intentionally thinking about how do they decentralize themselves? How do they really put a mirror up and ask the hard questions? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important that they're doing that. And I also think it's equally important for folks that are on the other end of the aisle, the folks that are proximate in the community, to show up and really look at them and say, here's ways you can push yourself further. And also, how do you push me? How do we actually collaboratively work together to actually build a more equitable philanthropy stream, but then also really put meaningful investments in the community? And so when I was asked to show up, I felt that it was important for me to bring not only my professional expertise, but my living expertise of being a Black woman in this space to show them this is the individual and a representation of the individuals that your work impacts every day. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, I love the Capital Collaborative ethos. It's one of the missions is to support diversifying the funding pipeline. And for me in particular, supporting leaders that are reflective of the community they serve is critical in terms of greater social impact for the work. So anything I can do to help, I will.
Antoine, I really like the piece that kind of stuck out for me is kind of bringing your own perspective into this.
Right.
And I think, Jonathan, you even said at one time throughout these past couple of days, we're not all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that's important. We have a variety of different fellows that are part of this experience and part of our ecosystem that are able to contribute and push the funders and also learn and grow themselves. Another question I have, and Antonella, I'll kick it off to you, is, you know, this event is called Hopes and Visions. As you think about and have had some really engaging conversations over the past 2.5 days, what are some of your hopes and visions for the philanthropy ecosystems, for yourself, for the funders, and for the general ecosystem moving forward?
Yeah, I would say, you know, the idea of hope is aspirational, but I will also say that when I think of hope, I think of the tangible nature of it. Some people will think of hoping and dreaming and, you know, redesigning as this pie in the sky thing. And when I think about what this kind of power of this community coming together looks like, I see it being actionable change that happens immediately. Not something that means let's come and have another convening, or let's, you know, say, oh, we're going to do this in next year's or the next 3 years, like strategic plan. But I'm hoping that things tangibly happen now. What are some shifts that's going to happen when it comes to how they distribute their funding? Are they going to actually measure themselves on actually being accountable to the community? And the vision that I have is that we really start to decentralize what does power financially mean when it comes to distributing funds. I think too much we are in this mindset that someone has power and someone doesn't, and the dynamic in the rooms are automatically different because of that. But what does it look like when they are sharing power and not just thinking about shifting it at the same time?
Jonathan or Tina?
Yeah, I'm going to build on that because, you know, this is my 3rd year being part of Capital Collaborative, and it's been incredible to see the progress. And one of the reasons why I keep coming back is to actually see the tangible progress that's made when we leave. So I remember in the first Capital Collaborative, one of the participants a few months after created a program that specifically earmarked funds for Black males who are leading nonprofits. And that was a tangible result. In a later collaborative, one person brought their know their numbers reports to their board. And so, you know, just seeing exactly that, you know, what will each of these participants do in the coming months and years is what keeps me coming back.
Mm-hmm. I was on social media and I got this video. It was a sad guru talking about how the biggest evil in the world is the hope that tomorrow will be better, because then it divorces us from our ability to make change today.
Yeah.
And he talks about, instead of hope, we should be filled with exuberance for the moment and the opportunity. And that's, I think, what today, this whole week was about. It's like, yes, we are imagining something that's not there yet. And at the same time, we kind of like push the table out that sometimes sets philanthropy and then, you know, nonprofits across from each other. And we just like sat around side by side around the table talking together. What do we want and what can we hold each other accountable to, but also what can we support each other with so that we can take the, you know, the risky steps, the brave steps that are going to be required to disrupt a system that we know has done harm, but can ultimately be a lot better if we bring community in and we do it with instead of to.
Absolutely.
And can I say quickly, because you said the safe and the brave steps, and I will add in the accountable steps as well, right? Because bravery also requires the space that allows you to be vulnerable without punitive action, which we know with power dynamics is not as easy as that. So what does accountability also looks like on both sides of that table? Even though I question, do we actually need that table? Like, where's the table located?
Get the table out.
Right.
Get the table out.
Like, can I own the building?
Yeah. I think that, you know, this question about hopes and visions can sometimes feel long-term, right? Not always, but I think you all were hitting on a little bit. Sometimes there's like immediate things you can be doing.
Yeah.
So for our audience out there who maybe in the funding world are fighting for equity in funding, and Tina, I'll start with you. What's one piece of advice you have for them that they could enact tomorrow, next week, in the next month to advocate for more fairness in funding?
Thanks for that question, because change needs to happen now. So we can't wait. So one tangible thing people can do now is just to know your numbers, right? It's an activity that all participants do early on, but know your numbers. How many BIPOC leaders are you funding as a reflection of the community? You know, how many students are you funding? So knowing your numbers gives you a great baseline to measure progress against. Yeah.
And if you start there, then I would add on top of that, once you know the numbers, interrogate how you got there, right? If you are funding largely white men, it may be because that's your network. That's not a bad thing, but then you might need to do the work of building out your network. Who do you need to invite into your organization, to invite into decision-making, who may have the network and the connections to the community that you lack? Because knowing the numbers is the first part, but then being committed to doing the hard work of, sharing power so that others can have a say is what takes it into action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I, again, want to build on the sharing power piece. I think, one, we need to do a power analysis on ourselves and also of our institutions. Some of that is looking at historically where we've been, but also what's our makeup now, and then what's our aspirational makeup in the future, and are we actually tangibly working towards that? I've been on the side where I've reviewed grant applications, and I repeatedly see people say, oh, I'm diversifying my board soon, like I'm gonna do it soon, and then a year later it's still soon. And I will say that philanthropy organizations also have the same issue. They're asking a question but not really looking at how are we measurably changing now, and also how are we shifting and sharing power now. And sharing power is at that policy bylaw level, and it's also at that relational level in your organization. Sharing power means that we actually are accountable at the same time. We are both showing up in that room and not just centralizing the philanthropist or the funder as the advocate, but we're actually advocating together. Because just saying, I'm going to hear from you, and then I'm going to go in that room and create the change or advocate for you. Once that advocate leaves, we're all still left wondering how do we break back in, and it actually causes more harm. So that sharing is deeper than just how do I be an ally or how do I listen to more BIPOC leaders. It actually is how do I share and show up with the BIPOC leaders, and we go through that process together.
Yeah. I can't thank the three of you for being here, for sharing wisdom and taking time out of your own busy schedules and your ventures to be with us today and for this week. Immense gratitude. And we'll be right back in a few seconds to talk with some other engaging collaborators.
Hello again. I would love to introduce you to our next round of collaborators who are going to share some of their experience. We have, first of all, Melinda Pollack, the Managing Director of Blue Meridian Partners, John Mohr, CIO at the MacArthur Foundation, and Laura Locker, Senior Analyst at the Lemelson Foundation. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Well, let's get into some of the meaty stuff. Okay, what has shifted for you during this cohort? You've had about 6 months together now. Tell us what's changed. Anything? Yeah? Okay.
So I'm still relatively new to being a funder. I've been a funder for about 2 years. And I think the sort of significant shift that I got even at our first maybe even our first virtual gathering, but for sure our first in-person meeting, was the opportunity to realize that in this role, it is really important to continue to learn and to continue to build your base of knowledge and to utilize that knowledge around closing racial disparities. In the case of the work I do, moving kids and families on a path to economic mobility, but that really you can't succeed in the work we're doing as funders by just marking progress through that knowledge and imparting that knowledge, that it's really critically important that the way we as white funders hold ourselves accountable is through the way we shift money, the way we shift funding to organizations and leaders of color, and that's how we mark our success.
For me, it was a realization and learning of how much work we as white leaders and executives of philanthropic organizations have to do. And I think a really great part of the program is interacting with people in various roles. So hearing from program officers and managing directors and presidents and CEOs of the challenges they have. And I'm coming at this from an operations perspective, so that's a little bit different as well. So that was really insightful. And I think initially through our initial on-site visit, really gaining a greater appreciation for how deeply embedded in systemic racism is throughout our society.
Right, regardless of the role as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, John.
I really struggled with this question because I felt like I went through paradigm shifts every hour. I was like, oh, the world is one way, and then somebody would say something. I'm like, well, it's not that way anymore. But like, I think one thing that really struck me was just this. I feel with justice work that there's this feeling it has to be a little painful, it has to be a little sad, it has to be rooted in shame, and so people come to it with trepidation.
Always serious.
Yeah. And then like I really felt, especially in this in-person meeting, that the arc of it is joy.
Yes.
You know, and it follows it along, and that's where it ends, and that's the paradigm that I want to hold, you know, with me. And so I really felt that.
I love that. Thank you for elevating that, Laura. So just to dig down a little bit deeper on what has happened during the cohort for you, can you share like one or two powerful moments that perhaps really challenged you or changed a paradigm for you as a white funder?
This was discussed earlier in the program about the power dynamic, and really hearing about that from different perspectives was so helpful and informative, you know, and the discussion of seeding power and like it's a pie, right? And if there's more pie here, there's less pie here, and just rather than that, the concept of working together to collectively increase our power was really, really powerful. And, you know, that resonated and was a theme in today's sessions as well. And that was just a really strong, clarifying, you know, moment. Doesn't begin to say it, but it was really impactful.
Thanks, John.
I think a step to being authentically able to lean into the shifting and sharing power conversation for me was in our first in-person time. We spent a lot of time talking about the concept of benevolent control and the layers of benevolent control. And I had really never learned that in that way from this seat. And I think so powerful to me to be able to break down those pieces and those practices and those powers that we hold in the way we show up, the things that we say, the things that we don't mean to do, but we do, and we can learn to check ourselves on, that are really precursors to being able to sort of make the joyful change that you're both referencing in the world.
And just to note, the concept of benevolent control is actually an analysis of power and philanthropy that was produced by DEI Works in Durham, North Carolina. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, go and head out to their website.
Sorry.
No. Thank you.
No, I'm changing my answer based on what you said.
That's fine.
I think like a real paradigm shift was, you know, I heard a lot that like that every foundation is different. We're all special little flowers. And then when you hear about benevolent control, you hear about the reactions to it, you hear about the exits that people take when they get uncomfortable. You're like, oh, actually, we're not special little flowers. We're all doing the same thing. You know, we're just slightly doing it in different ways. So I think that was a powerful shift. And to remind people when I come back, hey, you're actually following a pattern. You think this is a special thing to you, but it's not. And so I think that was powerful for me too.
Yeah, I want to add on in Durham, Cameron and Rhonda presented, right? And the heads of two nonprofit organizations there, and you know, talked about their work and what foundations asked of them, and you know, very passionately describing how important and urgent their work is, and in some cases pushing back and saying, you're asking me to do X, Y, and Z. That's your work. That's not my work. Right. That was powerful. But then also talking about the cumulative effects of systemic racism, right? And the urgency that it is literally killing them. That was really powerful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other moments you want to share? John's
This-
got
this-
another.
well,
Keep going.
I'm
Keep
sorry.
going.
The time today, and hopefully even more with the fellows, who entrepreneurs, very inspiring. It was great to interact, and I was realizing how we operate in sort of an opaque manner, and it was just wonderful back and forth in the conversations, and lots of great ideas, and planned follow up. It really made the day for me.
Yeah, and I would say, just seeing us all apply the things we've learned in this sort of culminating 36 hours or so that we've had together. Just one example of that, we did an exercise yesterday, right, where we were really identifying what it would look like to be a better, if not truly anti-racist funder. And I think just some of the things we were just naming were so front and center in the group that I was a part of, like not allowing ourselves to take off ramps. Some of us thought of it as like not allowing ourselves to ever take the hat of understanding and seeing what we can now see off, like how as a white person you could easily default to that, and just sort of how we help each other and how we hold ourselves to sort of permanently making that shift was really powerful for me yesterday.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing. Really appreciate the honesty and vulnerability in those moments where things have changed for you.
Yeah.
Like they're not everyday moments, and I think they'll be helpful for people to hear. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
One of our collaborators on our next panel had a family emergency, unfortunately, so isn't able to be here in person, but they generously shared their thoughts via video. So we are now going to hand over to Jessie Dixon, partner at the Opportunity Trust.
Hi, my name is Jessie Dixon. I'm a partner at the Opportunity Trust. We're an education funder based in St. Louis. I'm a member of cohort 3 of the Capital Collaborative. And through this cohort experience, I've learned so much. Although we're technically finished this month, I plan to continue applying what we've been working on in a few different ways. First and foremost, in my daily work as a funder. I've been so focused on centering racial equity in what we fund, I hadn't given enough consideration to how we fund, how we collect and consider data, how we meaningfully engage students and parents as decision makers, how we support BIPOC leaders. And I'm proud that the majority of grantees we support at the Opportunity Trust are BIPOC led, but I've grown a lot in understanding how we can best support these organizations. One of the most invaluable aspects of this experience was hearing directly from Camelback fellows who spoke to us candidly about all the ways white funders unintentionally commit harm to nonprofit leaders of color, often through well-meaning processes. So I look forward to applying these learnings to my future work as a funder. This collaborative has also helped us learn about ways we can better work together as funders to further our collective goals of racial equity at scale. Each of us in this cohort set individual goals with coaches that were provided to us through the Capital Collaborative. And the individual goal setting has really helped us positively impact the work inside our organizations individually, but we also have a collective responsibility as white funders to find ways to leverage the strength that comes from a whole that can be greater than the sum of its parts. This cohort has such a range of funders, from big national ones that support medical research to smaller place-based single-issue philanthropies, family foundations, philanthropic aggregators. And, it's not enough to put our heads down and try to help our individual places of work make bold steps toward racial equity. I mean, that's essential, but it's not sufficient. We can do more together. And so as a cohort, we're starting to consider how we might leverage this collective potential. I'm really looking forward to moving on some of these possibilities alongside this extraordinary group of colleagues and now friends.
Thank you so much, Jessie. We appreciate him sharing his thoughts, even though he can't be here in person. So I now get to introduce our last two collaborators who are going to be sharing today. We have Amelia Corl, Chief of Staff at the Opportunity Trust and one of Jess's colleagues, and Sophie Finelli, the Executive Director of the Stewart Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we are going to dive into the so what. You had this experience, you learned some stuff, you know, had your paradigms changed or shifted. Now what, right? Structured learning engagements usually have an end date, right? And for us, after 7 months in April, the Capital Collaborative will come to a close. And so when we get to that point in time, what do you think is going to be different for you?
Thanks, Schusterman. You know, I think there are two big things that stand out, and a lot of collaborators have mentioned this already, is the community that we've built together. I think there are cohorts that gel and there are cohorts that don't. And this has been one that is just an incredibly rich community. It's been filled with trust and joy and laughter and hard work. And I think what being part of the Camelback family looks like is it's not just access to our cohort and the broader alumni network, but it includes the fellows and the facilitators and the resources that all of them have brought to us. And I think the other thing I'm leaving with is a full cup, right? I feel a real sense of inspiration around what's possible and what's ahead. And that's happened in tandem. We had these big visioning exercises that were creative and immersive. And then we had these really concrete conversations about tools, like what are you doing with your board? Or like, how does your board book look different? Or what are you doing around your monitoring and evaluation frameworks? And so balancing that together made it really rich and really energizing as we get to the end.
I thank you. I mean, yes, and yes to all of that. I think for me, just thinking really about like Monday morning, right? Like, what am I going to do differently, and what have I learned? Where am I still being challenged? You know, that's what I'm holding on to. Is this is a journey. We all started in different places. I think we started also at a moment in time during the pandemic, at a time where foundations were saying a lot of the right things. Many of us had probably joined when there was a wave that pushing us in that direction, and that has shifted in the landscape. And I think that means that when we go back, we actually have a responsibility to remember why we joined at that time, what's different now, and how we're going to really rely on each other to hold ourselves accountable, to keep moving. And you know what I really appreciate about the work, and that what I think for me was really powerful, is that when you're the CEO or the president, you feel very lonely, right? You're in a different zone. So this was a really interesting cohort where we had other CEOs, some board members, a lot of program officers or directors. So we all had a different positional power in our own institutions. And then I think others have said we also had institutions that are national, some that are really proximate and working really deeply with communities. So we, I think, got to really check each other and we learn from each other. There's a lot of practical tools that we got. So really excited to be continuing with the cohort, with the alumni from cohort 2 and cohort 1, and then really looking to learn from your next cohort. It's going to join.
Yeah, we say it's ending in April, but really we're never going to let you go, because once you're an alumni, that's it. Were you going to add something?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, not to ask you the hardest question of the night, but I'm going to ask you the hardest question of the night. Okay. Beyond this specific cohort, what do you think funders can achieve in service of racial justice if we do this work together? We continue learning, we continue doing, we continue advocating, we continue stepping outside of our comfort zone, we continue to, you know, be in service of the leaders of color that that need us to center them and their communities. What's possible?
It's a big question.
Yes.
And so maybe I'll dive in for a minute on the word together. Because I think that there is something, you know, the secret sauce of the Camelback family is that we are in it together and we're doing the work together. I think
The collaborative in particular is a self-selecting group of folks. We already care about racial equity and justice.
Right.
We're already invested in our individual and collective learning journeys. And so there's this chance to accelerate between learning and action that I think is sometimes absent in other spaces. So I feel really compelled to lean into that energy and lean into that momentum. And I think the way that we're starting to brainstorm alumni networks and engagements and how we're going to share resources and set goals and hold each other accountable, you know, it has that like late night pizza party excitement feel where you're like, let's keep going, like let's keep brainstorming, and you know the walls are full of Post-its, and that's a kind of contagious energy that will carry us, I think, beyond Monday morning when we all get back to our home offices.
I really want to come to one of your pizza parties. They involve Post-its.
That's my idea of a good time, as you know.
Well, I think that building on this point, which is there's so much joy in this work, and then there's also some radical honesty about how far we are from the destination that we're looking towards, right? And so I think what we've learned in this cohort, and that I think we're all taking to heart, is that holding the contradictions. It's uncomfortable, right? To say, I'm a white person in philanthropy in an institution that is at its core problematic, right? So learning how to navigate these tensions, which are both personal, professional, political, understanding that our contexts are different. I'm in California, I'm not in Louisiana, I'm not in Texas, I'm not in Massachusetts, so my context is different. The reality of my partners is different. So what I've loved about this, and I'm hoping we can carry on in terms of collective impact, is that getting outside of our bubbles, not just getting proximate to community, which is really important, but also like really testing our assumptions about how far we've gone, can we go further, what's the real risk? You know, I think we all sometimes hold on to this idea, this fear that something, what could happen, right? And so we have each other. Like I can call you up and say like, what could happen if we decide, maybe you've tried it and you said, bad things could happen or amazing things could happen. And maybe in my context, those bad things are not that bad. Right, I can actually absorb them, and maybe in other context, a smaller step or is what the right next step is. So there's so much power in the shared learning, and we've been told over and over again that this is about practice, right, and praxis, right. That this is about doing, and by doing you learn and you do better, and there is no real feeling unless you don't share it, unless you're not willing to be vulnerable. So I think that's something that we've talked about, which is how do we move from fragility to vulnerability? Right. That's another place of, I think that's we've been told in this cohort.
I've seen you practice it as well.
Right.
I've definitely seen like again and again, you all have stepped into that place of vulnerability, and it's not the same place each time.
That's right.
The where your vulnerability, demonstrating vulnerability in Durham 6 months ago is different to demonstrating vulnerability today. There's growth happening.
Yeah, and I think it's such a huge question of how do you shift a sector, right? How do you shift a system? And the answer is always people. And I think by building community and building resource, Sophie spoke to the diversity of positions that are represented in the collaborative. You have a chief of staff next to a CEO, next to a CIO or a CFO, and there's not this like, it's not my work because I don't work with partners. That off ramp isn't available, and it's been so valuable for us to engage one another on what we're wrestling with. And we talk about risk. We talk about how we deploy our reputational capital or political capital within our organization. And sometimes that work like requires a hype woman or like requires a little cheerleading. And I do have a sense that that's going to continue well beyond the closure of the cohort.
Amazing.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think when the macro issues get overwhelming, focus on what you can actually do tomorrow, which there's a lot we can do. So I want to leave us with that, which is don't get overwhelmed and let the overwhelm be an off ramp to what you can actually do tomorrow, because we all can do better tomorrow. And like I've learned so much from you, from others, and I have ideas of what I can do different, literally, when I get back. So hopefully I'm held accountable, and maybe I'll be invited to the pizza party.
There we go. We're all hoping for an invite to the pizza party. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I really appreciate the reinforcing and also hopeful note that you brought to the conversation that, you know, there is always something more that we can do, even if we have a setback, even if we feel like we've already grown quite a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we hope that this has been helpful, insightful, inspiring to hear from our collaborators and from the Camelback Fellows. If you believe that diversifying power in philanthropy is important and you don't know how to begin, how to do that, or if you're looking for a supported peer group to learn and work with on your own racial equity journey, let us know. We would absolutely love to have you check out camelbackventures.org/Capital Collaborative, where you can also sign up for our newsletter, the Capital Collaborative newsletter, and you can also find us on social media as well. And the other thing I want to note as well is, you know, whether we see you applying for the Capital Collaborative or checking out our information, or whether you're looking for, you find another racial justice learning opportunity that works better for you. There are so many amazing programs out there. We just all need to be doing the work, however makes sense for us. Finally, thank you so much to our collaborators for sharing their experience today, all of them. To our Camelback Ventures Fellows for adding their perspective to the conversation. The Camelback Ventures team behind the scenes, and especially Tanya and Lex, our comms magicians, and to you all for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here.